Welcome to the American Diversity Report podcasts, where we interview diverse change makers and creative innovators. I'm Deborah Levine, the editor of the American Diversity Report, and your host today. And with me today is Connie Matsumoto and Kent Matsumoto. It's a delight to have you. They have authored Of White Ashes, which is based on the true stories of their Japanese-American family during World War II. Connie is a former corporate and interior design devotee who embraced the art of creative writing, inspired by Shakespeare's What's Past is Prologue. Her writing is intended to influence positive change in our world. Kent, a third-generation Japanese American, was born in Virginia and spent his formative years in Japan, where he attended the American school, and together they empty nest in Maryland. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be with you today, Deborah.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing about your book. But tell us first, what inspired you to get started with it?
I'll take that then. So we need to rewind the clock a little bit to 27 years ago when Kent and I were on our first date.
Oh.
And on that first date, we went to the Baltimore Museum of Art for a Dale Chihuly glass exhibit. And there was a precursor exhibit there for Dorothea Lange. And if you're not familiar with her work, she's a photographer who, in the early century, photographed destitution, despair, the Depression, the Dust Bowl. And she was hired by the US government to photograph the incarceration of the Japanese Americans, but to show the positive side of why they were behind barbed wire, never to show the barbed wire fences, really only to show why it was a really good thing to have people uprooted from the West Coast and taken to the interior of the country, to very remote locations. And so there was a photograph, it's a very famous photograph of a little Japanese American girl. She has a tag around her neck with her family number. She's holding her little suitcase, waiting for a bus to go off to camp. And Kent came up behind me, first date now, and he says, "That was my mother's story."
Oh my.
Well, I got shivers. And it was, oh, excuse me, that's the dangers of Zoom sometime. The FedEx man comes to the door and our little dog, who's quite well behaved, barks. So I lost my train of thought. I apologize.
Well, later on, that same date, I mentioned my father's side of the story. My father's side of the story is that he was born in California, but raised in Hiroshima. And we all know what happened in Hiroshima when the bomb exploded. He luckily survived, as did his parents and his brother. And then fast forward a bit, made his way back to California. So that's how the story was first hatched in Connie's mind. I shared with her on our first date what this was all about.
That must have been some date.
It was. It was.
How did you guys meet?
We met through a work situation. I have been an attorney for all my professional career. And at the time I was in a law firm and Connie was working in a corporation, and we met through a work environment.
Nice. Wow. And how long have you guys been married now?
Boy, Connie.
25 years this year.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, the first date was talking, as I said, about, not as Connie mentioned, talking about my parents. And she got to know my parents in the subsequent years. And we didn't set out to write a book. That's not how we didn't say, let's write a book together. Connie did say throughout the early years of our marriage that there's a story to be written here. Hearkening, Deborah, on your background as a storyteller, just because of the coincidence or the uniqueness of having two different people's stories from different sides of the Pacific Ocean, and yet meet and marry and live the American dream. So real quickly, we did try to engage my parents in telling their story so that we could memorialize their lives. I know you've taken your father's letters, as you shared with us, and memorialized his life. We wanted to do the same thing. And a couple of instances we hired a documentary filmmaker. My parents declined to engage in that little project of ours. We hired an established nonfiction writer who is very well established and has written numerous books. He actually, Deborah, came over and visited with my parents, who I'm a little embarrassed to say, just gave him the cold shoulder. So prospects of my parents' story dimmed at that point. And I did share with Connie that I would take it on. I would take on the writing, but it just never seemed to be enough time. So at that point, as you mentioned in the intro, Connie closed down her interior design business and set out to take on the project herself initially.
Go you. I know what that's like. I did not expect to be writing about my father's World War II experiences. I didn't know he had any at first, right? And when I started to find out and I started to write, I sent him the first chapter. And at first there was just total silence, right? And then I redid it, sent it again, and he said, "Well, you're getting there," which meant it's really not very good, but I don't want you to stop. So I didn't. But it took me 20 years to publish that. Yeah. So I appreciate so much of what you've done and your perseverance, right? And the decision to do this together. It's not an easy one. And when you started writing, what did your parents say about that?
Oh boy. Well, it really, Deborah, the timing wasn't about that. Connie, do you want to talk about?
Well, to answer your question, Ken's parents didn't know that we were writing the book. So his mom died the year before we started on the book, and in that year, his father was struggling with dementia. So they didn't know about that. But just the other day, someone asked Kent, "What do you think your parents would have thought about this book?" And I'll let him respond to that.
It's very straightforward, Deborah. I don't think they would have liked it one bit. Whether that's a generational thing, but probably a cultural thing. There's saying in the Japanese culture that the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. So it was never about them, it being their stories. They didn't want to draw attention to that. Cultural, generational, maybe traumatic, because those events back when you're 12, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, those are very traumatic events. And they always just wanted to live their lives and live the American dream.
And interestingly, throughout the years with Kent and getting to know and love his parents, I would ask Kent questions about their experiences. And I would always get these very short, crisp, soundbite answers that his parents gave him because they didn't talk about it with him or his brother or his sister. And through this book, we've come to realize that that's not unique. And, is it because of the trauma that they experienced to not want to shoulder their children with that? Is it because of their desire to move on? Is it because they never saw themselves as anything other than Americans? And they just wanted their children to live the America that they aspired to live? So who knows? They never said, but it could be any or all of those things. And a sweet story, Ken's parents would talk to me, which is another interesting dynamic. When I would ask questions, they would respond. And Ken's mom would give me books, and she would buy novels, and she would give me the novels because she really knew that I was so interested. I was very inquisitive. And so fast forward, the book is almost complete. We had a rare opportunity to sit down with Kent's aunt, his mother's younger sister, the last surviving Odate sister. And she had never talked to her children about the experience either. But she was willing to talk with me, and then Kent joined the conversation. And at the end of it, I told her I would type up the notes and I would share them with her, which I did. I got home, I typed up about 10 pages of notes, mailed them to her in Ohio with a note that her children were very interested in reading the notes. And I asked for her permission to give the notes to her children. And she never answered me. So I called her and asked her if I had her permission to do that. And she said, no, they can wait for your book.
I love this. You know, when I was a little girl and I said to my dad, we saw the Holocaust very up close and personal. I had read that he left these books in my room. One of them was The Diary of Anne Frank. And I said to him, Daddy, what happened to Anne Frank? And all he said was, she died.
Oh,
End
no.
of conversation. Yeah. So I understand a little bit about the silence, and I know that it's a bit mysterious, but apparently you were able to get enough information to write this lovely book. Tell us a little bit more about what happened and what you have put in your book about these stories that people need to hear.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the writing process maybe as Kent and I co-authoring the book, but why don't you take that one?
Okay. We really wrote the book, Deborah? I think I'm answering your question to not to capitalize on my parents' unique story or the uniqueness of it, but rather to honor my parents and the many Japanese Americans who suffered the worst of what World War II, in addition to what the European theater brought. But at least for the Japanese Americans, what that brought. Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese. My mother and her father, a Buddhist minister, lived on the island of Kauai. The next day, he was arrested by the FBI. And by the way, I'll digress very briefly. It was very powerful to hold in our hands the original document of the arrest warrant that we found when we went to the National Archives together. I know you're a researcher. I know you've dug deeply into research. And just as you held your father's letters, we held or saw that arrest warrant that symbolizes the temper of the times. So that was just a very powerful moment in the research of the story, which Connie will get to. But we, as I said, wanted to honor not only my parents, but the many Japanese Americans who suffered this discrimination, this incarceration based solely on race, because people look different. And Deborah, I know your mission is to bring awareness to diversity, to promote inclusion. And here we are, however many years later, and we still have incidents in our own country of discrimination based on race. And we have what many of us might even call unjust actions. We're not activists, we're not, but we are out to change hearts and minds through storytelling, ideally, through schools, through libraries, but at least for now, given our modest goals, to just take one reader at a time and have that one reader say, oh, that's how it felt to be taken, have your father taken away when you're 11 years old. Just imagine what it must be like to then go to the mainland. You've never been outside of the island of Kauai to a place called Jerome, Arkansas, where my mother was for a year and a half, reunited with her father, then taken to Tule Lake, California, because they filled out a certain form, the loyalty questionnaire, a certain way. So one of the words that we use when we talk about our book in forums like this is just imagine. Just imagine that happening to you. My father, for his part, won't give away what's in the story, but to have your hometown just obliterated by a bomb that unheard of, or unheard of. And the scary thing is, bringing it to today, Deborah, is that the nuclear power that this world has is multiple times more than it was back then. So all of those things have gone into our book, again, to honor my parents and to shed light on these incidents and what it was like, the feeling, the emotions. But Connie can talk a bit about the process, because it hasn't been easy, as we talked about early, to get here.
Can imagine. My goodness. Just a moment. How did your father survive the nuclear bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima?
He was 16 years old and working for the emperor, conscripted to the military, working in a rifle factory, making rifles. And he was on the other side of, he called it a large mountain, or he called it a mountain. It's really a big hill from where the bomb was dropped. And that isolated him from the devastation as it went out and across. And the factory was definitely damaged and he was hurt, but he survived.
And again, Deborah, it's powerful to visit Hiroshima and to stand where my father stood or was at the time at the factory. My grandparents, his parents, happened to be down underneath in the subway station. And we have since tried to visit the same place, but I'm not sure if we actually were there. But that's how he survived. My uncle, my father's younger brother, who has also passed, they were together, so they both survived.
Wow. I can't imagine, frankly, what it must have been like. But having the story told in such a personal way, with the details, where you are, what you hear, it does have an impact, and it should, because you're
We
right.
hope so.
The way this world is going, we need to pay attention for sure. So tell us, Connie, about the process a little bit more.
Sure. I do not have a creative writing background. As Kent mentioned, I was working for large companies in organizational development, and then moved on to interior design. But this story was burning in me for so long. And in 2017, I decided to close my business and focus full time on writing the story. So the first part was learning how to write a fiction book, because we didn't want for the book to be nonfiction for a variety of reasons, mostly because of the family dynamics and wanting to give the characters life. And when you give characters life, you need to make things up. And so the scenes are entire figments of our imagination. And that's why we chose to write fiction. But we wanted it to be thoroughly grounded in historical research. And so first we researched Hiroshima, reading many books, articles and books that Kent's dad had in his library, personal things that he had torn out from Life magazine. We went to Hiroshima, as Kent said, we walked where he walked. We walked where we think his grandparents walked. We went to the Peace Memorial Museum. We went to a school that was left standing and became a shelter for people right after the bombing, and a bank where, if you can imagine this, the bank had an atrium and the roof was blown off, all the windows were blown out. And just a few days after this bombing, the rest of the building remained. It was a concrete building, it remained. And just a few days after the bombing, people were working at the bank conducting business. Extraordinary, just unimaginable and extraordinary. But we were able to visit places like this. and then writing the first section of chapters, the early section of pre-war, war with the United States, military Japan, and life in Japan, life in Hiroshima, up to and through the bombing of Hiroshima, and then moving on to the Japanese American incarceration here, where we visited the camp. It's really just a farm now in Jerome, Arkansas, with a smokestack. That's what remains. And the Tule Lake, which is a national heritage site in Tule Lake, California. We were able to visit that with Kent's parents about 10 years ago. And it was wonderful to be there with them. We've been to the Japanese American Memorial Museum, the Smithsonian, the National Archives, Kent's mom's island in Hawaii. Met a woman who worked at the visitor center there, who went to elementary school with her.
Oh my.
Yeah, so there's nothing like traveling and talking with local people about events, because the material is just so rich. And then developing the structure of the book, determining the points of view that would be within the book. And then together brainstorming scenes. How are we going to bring this to life? As Ken said, history is about what happened. Historical fiction is about how it felt to be there. And that was a priority with us. And along the way, Ken still has his full-time job. The book was my full-time job, but he was a terrific scene brainstormer and debater of content, and certainly the cultural lens for the book, and a tremendous editor, maddening me with his wordsmithing.
You're a writer, you know that words matter, Deborah.
Yes, and I know that the editing is what really gets you to the conclusion. And drafts are wonderful. Editing is also an art. So together you've created something wonderful.
That's kind of you. Thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. I often depend on my husband, because when you're so close to it, you know, it comes out, you know, that you know everything.
Mhm.
But when you think of the reader reading it, that's another issue. So I would have him do the reader. And as someone who is an engineer and scientist, totally different from me, it was a very good choice. I imagine it's the same with you, different way of looking at life.
Exactly.
Yeah, and putting it all together, it's very powerful.
Yeah, we really leveraged our strengths in this project. And we're still married. We still love each other. So it was a good thing.
Absolutely. Do you have children?
We do. We are a blended family. So we have a total of 4 children between us, 2 in California, 1 in Colorado, and 1 in Maryland.
Which is where you are now.
We recently
okay.
moved to North Delaware.
Okay. I'll make a note of that.
Yes.
All right.
We're not too far from Maryland.
Yeah, indeed. So tell me, what should the readers take away from your book? What would you like them to feel, learn, see through your eyes?
You can't touch on this, but we are in a tough spot in history right now with our country. It's very divided. The culture wars are very heated. We have Russia threatening nuclear warfare. And so we hope, because we're not activists, and as Ken said, in any of these regards, but if a reader reads this book, we really hope that they will consider and try to imagine what it might have been like to be this young girl incarcerated in her early teenage years, to be this young man who wants nothing but an education and a life, to have his entire city destroyed and to come to America with no language ability. As an American citizen, so it's a unique twist. Kent's dad was born in California, went back to Japan when he was went to Japan when he was a baby, and then came back to America after the war was over. And so just to imagine any of those dynamics, any of those situations, and to maybe think about that in the context of today, because it really starts with each of us to have empathy toward another person, to be a little less divisive, a little less right, a little more kind. And we really do hope that books like this can help to open hearts and minds a little bit.
Sounds like a wonderful plan.
Thank you, Deborah.
Definitely needed today. We are, I think, beyond divided. It's just extraordinary situation that we find ourselves in, and that empathy that you mentioned is needed more than ever. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't talked about?
One thing, if I may, Deborah, and that is we talked about the pilgrimages. We've been to Tule Lake where my mother was incarcerated. Mother and three sisters, father and stepmother were, as well as many other Japanese Americans. And we are also going next week to, I've been to Jerome, Arkansas, but we're going to the first camp where my mother was to launch our book, formally launch our book, which is available on May 1st, the start of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. But we are going next week under the umbrella of an organization that we want to mention called the Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages. JAMP.org, I think, is the website. And in fact, we are going to be donating a percentage of the proceeds of our book to JAMP, JAMP, in hopes that, not in hopes, but in furtherance of their mission to go in and host, sponsor, organize these pilgrimages to the various incarceration camps around the United States. So I would like to mention that. Thank you for allowing us that short plug.
Absolutely. I think that's very important for people to hear about the organization and what they're trying to do. And wow, I wish I could be there with you. I think it would be amazing.
It'll be pretty powerful. There will be, it's getting fewer and fewer people who survived, lived in those camps. We hope that my aunt, who is still living, will participate by virtually. So those are all open to the public. Those, not the tours, but certain of the programs.
Of the programs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Right.
Happy to send that to you afterwards.
Yes, please do. We'll put it on your page.
Great.
People may want to see that very much.
Great.
And you, Connie, anything else you would like to add?
I would like to share our some contact information. If people are interested in learning more about us or Of White Ashes, I have the book here, so I will show it. This is
There you
Of
go.
White Ashes. And you can go to our website. It's www.matsumotobooks.com. And that's MATSUMOTO books.com. And there's a resource page with links and listings of books and films and all kinds of really good information that could be very helpful for students of these topics, as well as where we will be and what people are saying, and a link to the Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages organization.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure people will want to follow up
I
and
hope so.
have that opportunity to look at the resources as well as your book. And thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today. It's been an honor to talk with you. And audience, take care, but follow up. Take a look at the links that will be on the page and leave comments. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Thank you,
Deborah,
Deborah.
thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.